Sorry, Aaron.
You don't count for the quorum, so it's, yeah. I think I'm gonna make it double, I'm sure what it is. Everybody
Your mic's not on, but it's battery low.
does.
You are now.
We're holding our breath for you.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
My watch is 1 minute slow, I guess. We said
Since
6:30,
you
right?
can't
Yep.
hear, would you rather sit here and I'll sit there so that you can,
No, I
Would
sit
that help
next
you?
to Ron.
and I can move
I keep
over?
calling him Ron. He's got to change his name.
Because
I'll just
I'm
sit
Stacy
here.
Smith. Hi, Stacy. I'm Diane.
Here we go.
That's your microphone there, Diane.
Thank you.
yes,
There's water down there.
All right, this is a special called meeting of the Board of Adjustment. I'm going to call the meeting to order. It is now 6:32 on September 13th. At this point in time, we're open for any citizen comments, if there are any citizens that would like to make comments. You're the applicant, sir? You don't make a comment yet.
Okay.
Okay, since we have no other citizens in the audience, I'm going to go ahead and close the citizen comments section and move forward with the business items. First on the business items list is the ordinance that we operate under has changed in the vote of, I think it was about 3 weeks ago. No longer do we have 7 factors that we need to all find. It's been significantly reduced. Aaron, would you like to go through these? Since if I go through them, you'll just probably add to it anyway afterwards. So go ahead.
I'll give you a copy. It's on the corner.
Okay. Okay, so what changed with regard to section 11.20? The variance shall not be granted unless the Board of Adjustment finds that the variance is not contrary to public interest, that due to special conditions, a literal enforcement of the ordinance would result in an unnecessary hardship. In previous trainings with you, we've discussed the fact that the hardship under Texas case law cannot be self-imposed or personal in nature. It cannot be purely financial or pecuniary, and it must relate to a unique aspect of the property for which the variance is sought, rather than one commonly found on other property. That one is often the tricky one in Lago Vista because a lot of times folks will want to look at a particular slope of a property. In that regard, Lago Vista is almost all slopes. So you want to look closely at that particular factor. But these are the factors that Texas courts have focused on with regard to findings for issuance of variances. The council did agree to add something that's not specifically out or discussed in Texas case law. And is that the variance can be no greater than the minimum required to alleviate the difficulty or hardship for which the variance is requested. And that the spirit of the ordinance is observed and substantial justice is done. Some of these come directly from the statute. And so that's really your guiding principles. Those are the things that you're going to have to find in order to grant any variances going forward. If you have particular questions about any of those factors, I'm happy to discuss them with you. For our new members or newer members, I can certainly provide you copies of the previous kind of training materials or that we had that can kind of explain the cases and how they analyze them. If you want to either do it as a group or one-on-one, I'm happy to walk you through those so it'll help you in your deliberations and your evaluation.
Okay. Thank you, Aaron. Just a second. Well, Howard's got a question for you. But I wanted to add one thing first, Howard.
Okay.
And that is, we used to have 7 things that we had to find. Now we have 4. But you'll notice that at the end of the small letter C, it says and you'll notice at the end of B2, it says and. So that means you've got to find them all. If you're missing one, no variance. Okay, go ahead. Howard.
Okay, as Roy has pointed out, there's a lot of properties within Lago Vista, especially corner lots, that if you do 25 and 25, it creates a hard, the lot is not buildable unless you build a 4-story building, you know. So my question becomes to you, it says, must relate you to a unique aspect of a property for which the variance is sought rather than one commonly found on other property. Well, we do find it commonly on other properties within Lago Vista. Correct me if I'm wrong, Roy.
Yeah, we have unbuildable lots. And they're not rare. I don't know if I'd call them common, but they're certainly not rare.
And didn't I read that oftentimes they try to buy the
Oh, absolutely.
lots? Yeah.
We particularly north of 1431 and a little bit west of the airport, you have what are called flag lots, where they literally only have 10 foot of frontage on the street, and they're behind another lot. I mean, none of those are built.
Right.
You get your choice. You can have utilities, or you can have a driveway. You can't have both, unless you buy some more property. That's typically what they do, is they buy several of these lots and bring them big. And that's kind of common. And once upon a time, I guess, that wasn't as common as it is today. There wasn't a lot of building activity, but a lot of people are buying lots because their lots are so small. They have the benefit of knowing that somebody building on one of the small lots next to them wasn't very likely. But as that has changed over the last 4 or 5 years, you see a lot more of those get purchased. We have a special administrative plan amendment that we call a lot consolidation. It's a little bit simpler and easier. We process 5 or 6 of those a month. Where people buy 2 lots and put them together. It's easily our most common application.
I think your question, Howard, is really critical and Roy's answer, because I think what it does is that the essence of it is not every lot is required to be buildable. Not every lot doesn't have to be a buildable lot.
Well, and historically, and once again, I don't want to meld into the discussion of the application. But understand that, when Lago Vista was not a city, and was instead just a resort development, there was only a front yard setback. There were no rear yard setbacks, side yard setbacks, either of those. And those of you who've been on the Board of Adjustment may remember, we had a house where the guy wanted to expand his house that had no rear yard setback. You know, he applied to add on to that house and still not have a rear yard.
Okay, but I had, why does a person buy a lot? Most people buy a lot because they want to build on it, okay? So to say that, not every lot can be buildable, that may be true, but the fact is that people buy lots for the purpose of building, okay? So,
There's one exception to that, and that's POA access.
what's that?
POA access. A lot of people buy lots to have access to the POA amenities.
Okay,
And to add to existing property.
And there are some lots that are not buildable.
Yeah, I
And if people buy
understand
them, I mean, they do their due diligence as a purchaser, and they may or may not choose to buy them, but we'll get into more about that.
All right.
May I say something that I think is relevant here?
Uh,
Not directly to my petition, but relevant to your discussion. Lots are also acquired by lenders, because lenders lend on lots. When people are buying a lot to build on, which is how I acquired this lot, lenders lend on lots based on the understanding that someone is going to build on the lot. And then if someone doesn't make their payments, lenders have to take that collateral back, which is how I acquired this lot. And then if a lender finds out the lot is not buildable, then the lender has a problem.
Hey, all right, let's go ahead and move on.
Well, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Can I ask
Yeah, go ahead, Mr.
Aaron
Chairman.
some questions?
We're not doing the application yet.
No, I know.
Okay.
I
Aaron.
want to get back to the
Okay.
new ordinance versus the old ordinance. Can you sort of summarize what the actual difference is between the two? I mean, I'm looking at this, I don't see a lot.
Perhaps, I think 3 of the requirements were taken out. I think if you just tell us the 3 requirements that were redlined, if you've still got a red line copy.
I did not print the
I
red.
didn't print the label copy,
It's probably,
but it's in
it was in the city council packet, so we should be able to find
I
it.
think I printed the red line copy, but I don't know if I brought it.
I sent it at one point, but.
No, maybe I didn't.
A lot of it had to do with the particular.
Is this the one you wanted?
I know, but it's,
No, oh no, this isn't about the change in the
I
ordinance.
can't,
Another red line.
Well, is this what you're looking for, though?
Let me see. No.
I didn't think so.
I have the old,
If you got the
well, it's
old
not,
one,
no, it's not red line, but,
You've got the old ordinance.
but it's the old ordinance.
if you got the old ordinance, we can, hell, I can tell. Pardon me? Nobody does. Nobody does. Except for Jim. Jim had it. He's the only one that had it.
So, one of the key differences between what was in there, what was in the old ordinance and what's in your new ordinance is the requirement, previously there was a requirement that there be no reasonable alternative to the requisite variance that will alleviate the difficulty. That has been removed. So you don't have to look to see, is there some other reasonable alternative? Instead, you're bound by the limitation that the variance can be no greater than the minimum required. So you don't have to look for an alternative, but you're limited to granting a variance to the degree or that it's necessary, the minimum degree necessary. So that's related but different. That was number 4. Number 4 is still there. So it took away number 3, the alternative side of it, kept number 4, which is now C. The requirement that granted variance will have the effect of preventing the orderly use of the land in an area in accordance with the provisions of the chapter. So previously, the criteria required that variances be granted only when in harmony with the general purpose and intent of the chapter. That's a pretty loosey-goosey requirement. I think part of the rationale was to find something that's rooted in either case law or the statute itself. If this old number 5 does point to pecuniary hardship alone, that part did survive, because that is one of the factors that courts have looked at. But it's not this lesser or less defined, harmony requirement, that part's no longer there. So part of 5 survived, part of 5 went away. So the requirement previously in number 6 is that the variance would not violate the intent of the zoning ordinance nor the goals of the city's master plan. That the goals of the city's master plan are not as well defined as we would like, and so that requirement was removed from this list. Now, you still have this kind of broad brush requirement that the spirit of the ordinance is observed. So there is kind of still this loose requirement that emanates from state statute. And then for number 7, the previous version, number 7, it won't restrict the reasonable and necessary unobstructed access to sunlight and preservation of views of those properties that might be affected. That specific requirement was removed. Now, I will tell you that when you look at number 7 and you look at Texas case law, some versions, some aspects of that are tied in to the concepts that are in number B3. Case law looked at whether the property, there was some unique aspect of the property. And so your focus is on the property of the requester and not of necessarily the property of the surrounding property owners. And so there are some aspects of number 7 that survive, but it's really focused on the property owner itself, the requester's property, and not the surrounding property owners.
So it gets back to, I guess a special condition cannot be one that's common to other properties.
That's
Such
right.
as somebody can't start talking about elevations, or right back where we were, where we've been with that particular one.
Right, you want to focus on that person's ability to use their own property and something specific to the property itself, not something they've done or their financial interest in it or their ability to do something financially to the property. It has to relate to their physical inability to use the property in a way that it was intended. That's really kind of what the case law focuses on, and that's what we were trying to get back to, especially given that, as our chairman has pointed out in previous occasions, that if these cases, if necessary, if the decision is not, if the applicant is unhappy with the decision of this board, they can proceed to district court. And so we really do want to have our decisions rooted in Texas jurisprudence so that courts can look to the same things. that our ordinance does.
Well, and it'll help you in a specific satisfaction circumstance. If we can look to the court and say, okay, the courts have already found this case
Right.
and ruled on it.
If held similarly,
I have, even though the language seems similar, similar.
It holds
can
up better.
Be meaningful, I mean, now it's virtually identical, and now you can look to the jurisprudence and rely on it a little more carefully, or carefully may not be the best word, but rely on it knowing what the outcome should be.
So, speaking of state law, we're talking about section 211.009, authority of the board.
yes, sir.
And I guess I'm looking at B1, number 4B1, which says, you know, our ordinance just talks about authority given by 3A. No, what did it say?
You talk about the enumerated hardship.
Now, what I'm talking about is there's some pecuniary stuff down here that says in exercising its authority under subsection A3, the board may consider the following as grounds to determine whether compliance with the ordinance is applied to a structure that is the subject of the appeal would result in unnecessary hardship. And then there's these conditions. One is the financial cost of compliance is greater than 50% of the appraised value of the structure, is shown on the most recent appraisal roll. Number two is compliance would result in a loss to the lot on which the structure is located of at least 25% of the area on which development may physically occur. So
Yeah.
we might, if that's valid to, you know, our rulings, we may hear about that later on.
Yeah, there was an amendment in the most recent state legislative session that
Yep.
relates to that. And that was actually adopted after the ordinance passed through the mill.
But it's state law,
I
so,
understand, in addition to the redundancy that you picked up in one of the subsequent sections, we're gonna have to go look at that new state statute.
well, if it has any impact on the case that we're gonna hear, before you go look at it, do we consider it?
Well, and understand, I don't think it's necessarily inconsistent with our ordinance. Right now, it says you cannot base your decision solely on pecuniary or financial hardship.
Right.
I think all they did was give you language that says the same thing. I don't think they said it can be purely financial. It just now defined exactly what that means.
It gave you some objective parameters to look at.
But I
And that
agree,
was why the three subsections under hardship, those aren't in the state statute, those were in the jurisprudence.
I agree with the pecuniary part.
Right.
It's the reduction of buildable area by 25% that I kind of want to know if that's something we should be considering.
So we are required to comply and you're required to apply state statute.
Okay.
And so the factors that are adopted, that are now effective September 1st, apply in this particular circumstance. And I think Roy has couched it appropriately in that, B11, the financial cost of compliance does, give some context to the pecuniary aspect of it. These are all, items that came out of the case law. As a result of case law, folks went to the legislature and said, we need to add these things in. So it is all new, and it can't be 100% financial, but here's what gives you that context. I think part of our goal in amending the ordinance was to give you more concrete things to items to base your decision on. And these are yet additional criteria that, or items that will give you focus on each of those criteria.
Our goal is to, mimic the state statutes as much as possible, and now we have a new text.
Okay.
Now that we're 13 days into September. Yes, sir. That's a very keen observation and something that the board will need to look at. And apply.
And we will, in fact, take it back from you as soon as we get that.
All right, let's move forward. Any other questions for Aaron, Roy, me, anybody else? All right. We'll go ahead and close that discussion item. Next item is comments from council liaison. Council member Marion, do you have any comments you'd like to make today?
I do not have any comments to make to the commission this afternoon. Thank you for asking.
Okay. In that case, I'll open the public hearing and action. This is application on 21-1904-ZON-VAR. Application for a variance granting relief from the requirements of section 2.10 of chapter 14 of the Lago Vista Code of Ordinances that establishes the definition and location of the rear yard setback as being opposite the front yard, which must be adjacent to a public right-of-way at 6904 Pinto Cove, RK Ranches, Plat 1, Lot 1030. I'll open up the staff presentation. Roy,
Yes, sir.
all's in your court.
I'm not so sure how much it relates to this application, but it is a fact that the staff proposed an amendment shortly, not before this gentleman bought it, but the person that defaulted on the loan that he was referring to purchased the property. It was several months after we amended the ordinance. The reason we amended the ordinance had nothing to do with problems with anybody trying to assert that the rear property line was not the one opposite the front property line. It had to do with people trying to manipulate where the front of the lot was on corner lots. You have some very small corner lots in Lago Vista where the houses wouldn't fit if you treated the front door and the front yard as being the same. So what they were constantly trying to do was call the side yard the front yard and have the one opposite that be the rear yard so that they had a little more room for a bigger house. There's a lot of reasons, not the least of which is public safety, why you want the front door and the address being the same and have that be established as the front yard. Particularly in a community as confusing as Lago Vista, you really want emergency services to be able to find the house without a lot of head scratching and those kind of things. So that can be a real problem. So basically, we needed to put a stop to that and adopt an ordinance that was more consistent with, current best practices everywhere. And to establish that the front door and the municipal address had to be one and the same. And we simply added, while we were in there defining things that had never been previously defined, we decided to add the language, oh, by the way, the rear yard's the one that's opposite the front yard. I'm not so sure we had anybody challenge that ever before, but lo and behold, that's the application you have in front of you today. Now given the background of the application, the problem seemed to have arisen by the fact that people around here tend to rely on title surveys. And rather than look at either the zoning ordinance, which is what establishes the setbacks, they would look at title surveys. And in fact, the gentleman showed us two different title surveys done for two different people. And you'll see that they show the rear yard setback in two different places. Well, we decided to go back and look at the original plat. And in fact, the original plat didn't show exactly where it was before. And in fact, it showed no setbacks. And it didn't even show the rear easements that are reflected on both of those plats. Instead, it was simply as a note. It said that there would be a 15-foot public utility and drainage easement in the rear yard. And oh, by the way, that's where the the rear setback would be. And they were using that language, nobody showed or did a drawing saying this is where the rear yard is. You have two different people look at the same note, the same plat, and reach completely different conclusions about where the rear yard was. Neither one of which, in the staff's opinion, is valid. Instead, setbacks are established by ordinance. This one was established by the ordinance before this lot was purchased in 2019. And as far as we're concerned, that's exactly where it is. I don't know what else we can add to that.
Look, I have a question. My first question is, you say, and that's exactly where it is. Where are you saying it is?
The front of the lot is the portion that fronts on the cul-de-sac at Picco Cove.
I got, not worried about the front.
Right.
Yeah.
The property line directly opposite that is the one that's shared in common to the city-owned property.
Well,
Which is the
Here's-
back line.
here's the thing though, is it appears this is a five-sided lot in it. So just because, I mean, of the
Well,
particular angles,
And the definition covers that.
it does.
Yes, it
Yes,
does.
it says there may be more than one line or curve that establishes any one of these yards, particularly the rear yard. And it's specifically included in the definition of the rear yard, that it may be two contiguous lots or lines in totally different angles, making up that rear yard.
Well, what in the ordinance establishes so the city is claiming that the line that separates the lot from the 100-foot wide easement is the rear
Yes,
line.
let me read you the language in the ordinance. Rear yard setback, the yard that shall be designated as the rear yard is situated as directly opposite of the designated front yard as possible. This yard might be defined by a number of distinct property lines that are not geometrically continuous.
Okay,
In other words, it's both of those property lines that's the rear.
all right. And I guess my other question is that it appears from the title survey, and a title survey is going to reflect basically title, that's what it's meant to do. It's to,
That
and-
doesn't reflect city ordinance.
correct, but it also does reflect that there is a 15-foot, and I see the problem with two plats,
Right.
okay, because it says it's a 15-foot DE and PUE, okay, that's public utility easement,
Correct.
okay? What's the DE, drainage easement?
Drainage easement.
Okay, and then, and that's ostensibly, it looks like it's the same easement, just reflected in two different places on both plats, is that correct?
Right, just like the setback.
Okay,
They reached a different conclusion
Yeah.
on which one was the rear property.
well, but my point would be is that if it is an actual utility easement, then there should be a legal definition of that easement somewhere.
It was, and like I said, if you look at the original plat, it was simply a note,
Well, it's a note on the plat, I understand that,
and that's all there was.
but that easement has to be recorded somewhere.
Mhm.
And in that recorded easement, there will be a legal definition of where that easement exists.
And that's what I'm telling you, it was not drawn.
I know it's not drawn. Do we have a copy of the easement? Because
Isn't this it?
It's the note, yeah.
This is the note.
well, I understand that's the note, but see where it says recorded volume 41, 71, page something?
But that is the original plat, is what I'm telling you.
I'm-
That's what was recorded.
I'm not denying it's an original plat.
Okay.
An easement is a real property interest, okay? Just like a deed to a house, a deed to this property. And it is set up, in that easement, there has to be a valid legal definition of where that easement exists.
I see what you're saying.
And that recorded document that they're referring to should tell us where that easement
I
exists.
understand, and I'm telling you, it does not.
There's no volume 4171, page 1272 deed records.
That is the the recorded plat.
Are you saying that the easement does not have a valid
There's no definition.
definition?
And that's common, unfortunately.
In the old
Some of
ordinance.
these plats.
Does it have a plat?
I'm sorry?
Does it have a plat attached to it, a certified surveyor's plat?
Right, the plat is recorded and there is on the plat, they're drawn at such a small scale that they don't draw any easements or setbacks on there, they're just referred to them in the.
Aaron, do you understand what my problem is? Is that if there is an easement, it has to have a valid legal definition. And from that that property description, you have to be able to tell where that piece of property is on the face of the earth,
Right.
or it's not a valid easement.
Well, and that's my point, which is exactly why you have two different surveyors read that same document and reach two opposite conclusions about where it is.
Well,
What's this?
and the surveyor on this one survey specifically says he relied on a commitment for title insurance, that he didn't do his homework. He relied on a commitment for title. So it's like he's showing easements, but he didn't research himself. He just looked at a title commitment, and a title commitment is not a
For
policy.
whatever
It's a-
reason, the surveyors that did the original plat just assumed that nobody would ever have a problem determining where the real was, and gave no definition. Just like our ordinance didn't include a definition until 2019 when the road was.
Well,
What's
here's
the
Certain
significance?
understood
here's the problem. Here's the problem. If there is an easement, okay, and at this point, I'm not sure there is, because
I agree with you.
you're telling me there's no valid legal description of this piece of property anywhere.
But the easement property, I agree. It's ambiguous.
The easement, not the property.
What's the significance of the easement versus the
Somebody
setback?
owns it.
Well, versus the setback, which is what we're
Well,
dealing
it's
with.
Okay,
just-
the difference is-
Through their conclusion.
The difference between an easement and a setback is simply a city regulation.
But that's what we're dealing with here, is the
Well-
setback, right?
But an easement, you asked me, let me answer the question. You asked me what the difference is. An easement is a real property interest. Somebody owns it,
Right,
and we can't move it.
right.
So that is what
But do you-
concerns me.
If you could move the easement, do you have to move the setback as well?
Not necessarily, no. No,
So-
no, the easement may not be relevant to the discussion at all, but it's usually, the reason for the setback is to include, normally, to include those easements.
Like a usual
Well, and
easement.
that's why the staff brought it up, is that, you know, they both relied on the same ambiguous
I
document.
have a
And
question.
came up with two different conclusions as to what they said.
Okay.
Okay, so let me ask you this, Aaron. Let's just say that he's correct, that there's no legal description of this easement. Okay, so the question is, let's just say the owner builds inside this easement, and later PUC comes by and says, wait a minute, you're in our easement, you know, we're going to tear down this part of your house because we need to put something through here, okay? Can they do that?
So here's, yes, to strictly answer your question, yes, they can. However, the city is not going to issue a building permit to allow someone to build in an easement. Now,
That's the goal, but the city does not want to do that. But, I mean, it can happen by accident or something, but
And
we're
we
trying not
can
to.
vacate the easement even when they
that's right,
build without a permit. We say, no,
Yeah.
you're fixing this.
So what you're saying is there is no easement?
No.
we have not found any dedicatory instruments. I think that's the point that your chairman's trying to get at, is there's not an instrument that there defines where that easement is, other than the plat note. That's it, that's all that exists, and because it's ambiguous, there is a question as to where that easement is.
And notwithstanding that, it never established what setbacks are.
Right.
But it explains why you have two different title
Title
surveys that
right.
show two different things.
It's kind of ancillary information.
So,
Okay.
yeah, I don't see what the easement location or exact legal description, why that is germane to the issue before us of the 100-foot
really not.
setback.
Right, the ordinance says and defines where it is. Okay?
Well, the 25-foot setback would be a city requirement, right?
Established by ordinance.
Okay. But the 15-foot setback, according to this, it is an easement.
Well, right, it's. an
Okay.
easement, not a
So
setback.
the question becomes is, if this committee would get rid of the 25-foot setback, grant a variance and say that it needs to go to 15, it can go to 15 feet and 5 one side, 5 on the other, okay, does that allow the applicant to build inside this property?
The front and backyard working.
The,
I don't know
the,
that.
the setback is measured from the property line
Well, I
without
have a
respect to
question.
where the easement is.
Well, I understand that, but it's showing here on the survey that there's 15 feet and 25 feet. That gives them an extra 10 feet. So the question becomes is, with the extra 10 feet, can the applicant build what he wants to build on this property?
And my question tangential to that would be that, given that these two surveys seem to indicate two different lines as being the backyard defining line, if the city of Lago Vista were to, for example, accept this little L2 as what, on the Survey Works plat, the L2 as that little segment that really abuts the neighboring
Yeah,
side.
because this one shows
If you call
5 feet.
that the backyard line,
The setback is
and,
measured from
and
here
then there's
or
your
here.
25-foot
This
setback
neighborhood
that's
easement
opposite the
There
front
could be-
yard.
This is
I'm
the
just
official
presenting a
survey.
scenario, I'm not saying,
This
I'm
is
just,
the
that
line
in,
that says
in lieu
that
of
there's an
calling the
easement
long,
here. This is
the
not.
long line where there's a 100-foot easement in the city property,
And that's what
in
he's
lieu of
asking
calling
this
that,
board to do.
the 20,
He's asking you
then he'd
guys
get that same
to-
10 feet
to
extra.
Take the definition that exists in our ordinance today and substitute a different definition. That's the relief he's asking for about this.
Because our definition in the city says it's the rear property line is the one that is most opposite the front property line. Okay, so, or to not change the definition, but make an exception for this particular unique piece of
You're
property,
correct, by
maybe?
the way.
I asked that question in the email,
Yeah.
whether he's asking to reduce the defined rear yard setback from 20 to 25, from 25 to 5 feet.
Or 15?
The answer was no. He said, no, he's asking for you to define that L2 line as the rear setback.
Okay, I'm not, another
can
another question, and that is, it seems to me, that, I mean, when you're defining the rear setback line, and you're doing that for the purposes of putting, of making sure that there's a public utility easement or the ability to lay public utility in that setback, if that's what it is, that's the reason for it, then
It's typically, it's, you know, a privacy aesthetic issue.
can be, but if there's already an easement there,
Well, the
you
easement
can't.
is completely unrelated to the most part.
Let me finish answering my question, ask my question, please. When you already have a 15-foot easement there, if that's not where the setback is, then that is effectively a setback, because you can't build on that easement, correct? Whether it's a city-required easement or setback or an easement, you can't build on it.
It's actually more restricted than setback.
It's much more restricted than a
You can't
setback.
pave over the top of it.
That's,
And you can in setback.
right. So when you are trying to define the backyard, why, in the ordinance, and I don't know why the city council did this, but it seems to me like to make sense, it would say if there's already a public utility easement there along one of the back lines, okay? One of the back lines, then that is the official back line for setback purposes as well.
Mr. Chairman, I would posit to you that there are a varying number of interesting scenarios and circumstances in Lago Vista. We have lots of easements that run between two property lines along side yards.
Mhm.
And so I think going the direction that you're suggesting could create more confusion and problem. The definition that the council has adopted with regard to the backyard, the back property line being opposite or the most opposite of the front yard is the clearest way to define it. The city shouldn't define your front yard and your backyard related to where people want to put easements. Easements exist in all kinds of places. We have easements, utility easements, drainage easements, all other types of easements that run across property, through
And
property, side and around.
I'm not talking about the other types of easements. Generally, almost every lot in Lago Vista has a drainage and public utility easement across the backyard. Is that correct or not?
You know, it ranges
It can
from
be
5
side
feet
yards,
to
too.
15.
Yeah, it's
And-
not
Yeah,
consistent.
I understand that it's different. It can be different sizes. I understand that. Okay,
And they're easily changed, by the way.
Okay.
Routinely changed.
all right. Okay.
May I
All
say
right,
something that's very
you got
relevant?
anything else, Roy? Anybody have any more questions for Roy?
I have one
Stacy,
thing.
go ahead.
Can you reiterate to me what he said you had asked him specifically in an email that he didn't want to change the setback? That's not what he was asking.
He did not want relief from the extent of the setback. I asked him, I said, are you trying to reduce the setback
Okay.
from 25 feet to 5 feet? He said, no, I'm
Okay.
asking that the rear setback be defined as being the line that is opposite the straight portion.
Right, okay.
You wanted to change what was the rear,
Definition. He
Any
wanted
questions?
the rear property,
No?
right?
Howard, are you squared away? Any other questions?
May I
All right.
add something that is
It's,
relevant to your discussion?
hey, well, you're just about to get to present, sir. Hang on just a second.
It's not actually relevant to my application. But Mr. Jambor can probably agree with me on this or disagree with me. All of the other lots along Pinto Cove have a 15-foot public utility easement along the back lot line, which is parallel to the street.
Okay. All right,
And the
we're done with him, so if you want to make your presentation now, come on up to the dais, please, so we can.
So my name is Bill Kreider, and I have a self-directed 401k that I loan money out of. And I loaned some money to a company called Favi LLC, and they used this particular lot as collateral. They didn't make their payments. I gave them, they were actually a year late when I foreclosed on them, and that's how I acquired this lot. It was collateral for a different property, and they didn't make their payments, and that's how I acquired it. So this is also an issue of what happens to lenders when they loan on lots in Lago Vista. If they acquire those lots based on, are these usable lots, and then later find out, no, these lots are not usable based upon public documents that made them think they were usable, well, that's an issue, that's a separate issue. But it is an issue that I hope you will keep in mind. You have in your, you're seeing it up on the screen, the survey that I was relying on, and also upon the public plat, which has been mentioned several times, of the Barquet. And in that survey, it shows the line that's shown as L2, it's a short line about 25 or 29 feet, something along those lines, as being the back lot line. I have no argument at all about the front lot line. It's on the cul-de-sac. no problem there. And as Mr. Jambor mentioned, that's the main intent of that ordinance, is to establish the front lot line. But where we come into a problem is, where's the back lot line? When I acquired this property, my understanding was the back lot line was this L2 line. Now, in fact, I've seen some of the other surveys that I'm assuming that the city probably relies on as well when they issue permits, for example, for people to build on these other lots that are along Pinto Cove. That public utility easement that's along line L2, you can see in this survey is a 15-foot public utility easement. And it runs parallel to Pinto Cove. And the same is true of all of the other surveys that are along that Pinto Cove. So the first thing is this. If you go to that second survey, the one that was later done, you see I went to sell this lot, and when the survey was taken to the city to issue the building permits, the city said no, that the new survey rendered this basically an unbuildable lot. And so this second survey, as you can see, shows the backlot line as being the longer line adjacent to the city of Lago Vista land. And it shows a 5-foot public utility easement parallel to Pinto Cove along the line that used to be called L2. Now that's the first thing. So all these other lots have a 15-foot utility easement parallel to Pinto Cove. But if you put a 5-foot utility easement across my lot, then what's going to happen if you issue a building permit that goes into that other 10 feet? There's a problem there. Because if you issue a building permit that goes into that other 10 feet, then it's a perfectly valid building permit. And yet, if some utility needs to come through there, they're going to tear down whatever building is there. So that's one problem. But the real main problem for me is this, is that saying that the setback, the 25-foot back lot line, that the back line is the 209-foot section adjacent to the city of Lago Vista land. Now, in the original plat, in the plat notes, the plat notes are ambiguous, and as we've already mentioned a number of times. They're subject to a lot of interpretation. But the pretty clear interpretation has always been that these lots are aligned with the streets in the subdivision. They're aligned with Pinto Cove, Palomino Cove, and the various other coves. And in fact, all of the various surveys that I've been able to look at of all of the lots have shown the back lot line as parallel to the streets. Now, you don't have it in your package, but I'll pass this around, and if you're afraid, I don't have COVID. I've had both my vaccinations, and I actually had COVID back in July, so I'm pretty sure that I'm not contagious or anything. But this is the adjacent lot, and I'll pass this around, but my lot is here, and this is the other lot that's on the cul-de-sac. You'll see that there is a back lot line here, not adjacent to the city land. I'll put this here, and anyone who wants to look at it is welcome to take a look at it.
That's lot 1029, right?
This lot is 1029, that's correct. So that's lot 1029. And it shows the setback line, the back setback line, and the 15-foot easement, once again, parallel to this Pinto Cove. And I don't have, but I have seen a few other surveys, and all of them have the back lot line
But are they-
parallel to the street. And my reading of the notes in the plat, my interpretation of these ambiguous notes, is that the back of the lots is parallel to the street. The front of the lots is on the street. It makes no mention anywhere of any lots having backlines at the edge of the plat. Now, so First thing is, I feel like if you change the setback or the backlot line to not be the L2 line, that you're changing the goalposts in the middle of the game, at least for me. Because I acquired the property with the understanding that that was the backlot line. Secondly, what is the purpose of a setback? This was brought up a little earlier. There's aesthetic reasons, there's access reasons, there's making room for the public utility easement. Well, if that 209-foot section adjacent to the city of Lago Vista land, if that's considered a side lot, it's still gonna have a 5-foot PUE, and it's still gonna have, what is the side lot easement?
5 or 15.
It's 5 or 15, whatever it is. I'm not asking you to change the easement rules. Set the easement, whatever it is. All I'm asking for you to do is define that 29-foot segment as the back of the lot, not the 209-foot segment. So what is the purpose of a setback? It's to give access, it's to give visibility. Well, guess what? There's a 100-foot wide easement right there in the city of Lago Vista land. The city of Lago Vista has granted a 100-foot easement there to the power company, LCRA. That easement's gonna be there, I guess, pretty much forever. So there's access, it's away from all other buildings. You've got plenty of clearance. All of the needs are accomplished that a setback line would have. So having additional setback there is really not necessary. Yes,
I have a question.
Yeah.
If this committee was to move it from 25 feet to 15 feet, does that give you enough room to build?
no. First of all, I'm not gonna build. I'm gonna sell the lot to someone who is gonna
Let
build.
me make a
But it
correction.
doesn't,
There's been no permit application
For the
on
very,
this property
right.
ever of any sort whatsoever. What we were contacted with was
Well,
survey,
I
this type of
agree.
surveys, that what
I
we do
agree
about
with
it.
Ron that until we can define clearly what this is,
I can't tell
how do you say yes or no?
Sir,
I mean, how do you say yes or no when you can't even define where the easement is at? How do you say yes or no?
here's what the plat says. It says the 15-foot public utility easement at the back lot line. So where is the back lot line? That's something that,
Well,
You define.
that's the question
when
here.
you
Where-
made the loan,
Yes.
did you get a lender's title policy?
no,
Oh, because if you had, then the lender would have conclusively
no,
guaranteed
the
you.
title company would have based it upon that survey.
No,
They would have based it upon this survey right here,
The first one
the first survey.
that shows 5 foot.
And if the city came back and said, no, that survey is invalid, which the city says that survey is invalid, then the title company would say, sorry. And in any case, I made the loan with this as collateral. Period. I make
Okay.
loans with property as collateral out of my 401K. I'm just an individual that does that. But what the plat says, it's a 15-foot public utility easement along the lot back line. All of the other lots, all of the other surveys have the lot back line parallel to the street. And it's clearly the intent, in my opinion, it's clearly the intent of the plat, and it was the intent of the city way back when they approved the plat, that those easements and those back lines were parallel to the street. And that's why all of the other surveys that have been approved by the city and the city is allowed to build on,
Sir, none of these were approved by the city.
The city
okay,
doesn't approve.
then the city has used as their,
This was in the county when that happened.
okay, that someone has used all these other surveys have a 15-foot public utility easement along that same line my short segment of it is called L2 on one of the surveys. That
Is that true on
29-foot
both sides of the
segment.
street?
Pardon?
Is that true on both sides of Pinto Cove?
It's true on every street in the subdivision. It's true on Palomino
Except for
Cove,
the
it's true
back
on
of the
Pinto
curve
Cove.
of the
it's-
cul-de-sac, and the back of the cul-de-sac, is there no 15-foot on any of these other plats on this back easement area,
None
the
of these
LCRA,
plats have a drawn easement. They're all no.
for the back property line?
Right,
There's-
there's no drawn easement.
There's nothing drawn on the plat.
They all predate the city, no subdivision regulations in the city.
All that it
no
says
zoning
is there's a
ordinance.
15-foot public utility easement at the lot back line.
Well, that-
Understand
Can-
It's very
I have a
ambiguous.
question, are there, where, this is a developed area, where are the utility lines? Are there,
They're going along the street, and understand that these were gonna be serviced by MUDs when these things were approved, and that's where those utility lines were gonna be originally in the rear.
originally, but they're not? Currently, the supply, a utility supply to this
Right, and
neighborhood
which why
is in the
we
front.
vacate those 15-foot easements routinely. They're
We
not
do
needed.
vacate the 15-foot.
It's a process 4 or 5 a month. Swimming pools are built. in
Is that
the-
an option in this case?
To vacate the easement, yes, but let me.
But we still have, our essence is the
It's the
25-foot
setback. This is
setback
not
line.
Yeah,
about
Okay.
and the
So I
easement,
have another
the
question.
easement isn't an issue here, the setback is the issue.
And I might argue, I mean, once again, you know, the suggestion was that there was a building permit that was based on this title survey. I'll be honest with you, not only is there not, to my knowledge, such a building permit application, I can't tell you that you can meet the zoning ordinance requirements using these setbacks either. I don't have a document that would suggest that that's true.
Okay, I misunderstood. I thought those guys that,
No, sir.
okay, so I had this under contract, and my understanding was they went to get a building permit, and it was denied because there was
They asked
insufficient
us which
space.
one of these plats was accurate. We told them neither.
Okay, so in any case, it's a tight fit, and even if we come out, even if I did ask for relief and move it back to 15 feet, that still wouldn't give us enough room to build on. And I'm not asking to change the front line, which is the main emphasis of the ordinance. All I'm asking is that within your purview and within your authority, you have the ability to state which of these two lines is the back lot. The 29-foot line or the
Can I
209-foot
ask a
line.
question? Okay,
Yeah,
Mike,
let's make sure, are you done with your pitch?
I believe so, unless y'all have some questions.
We'll have some
for me.
questions, but
Okay.
that's
Okay.
what I'm trying to figure out.
so my question is, let's just say that this committee says it's 5 feet, okay? And we grant the variance based on the first survey, okay? So, the city issues a building permit, and 3 years later, PUC comes through and says, yeah,
Let me repeat myself. We do not have a building permit application that shows that this is buildable. I can't tell you it is or it isn't. And you might remember one of your findings has to do with that.
so you're saying this lot's not buildable the way it
I don't know
is?
whether it is or it's not.
Okay.
The question that gave rise to this application was, which one of these title surveys accurately determine where the setback is? The answer is setbacks are established by ordinance, not by title surveys. Period. End of story.
So the question would be which one correctly reflects the ordinance? And
The ordinance as it reads right now, we answered that question.
Yes, go
the
ahead.
ordinance as it reads right now.
Hang on,
Mr.
hang
Chairman-
on a second. We got a couple of different questions going here. One person at a time, please.
Okay.
Aaron,
Mr. Chairman, I have some concerns that what you're hearing tonight is not something you have authority to make a decision about unless it's specifically a determination a decision regarding the Director of Development Services determination that the back line is different than what our ordinance states. If it's not a request for a variance from the setback requirements, which apparently is not what's being requested, he's not asking for relief from the actual setback requirements themselves. He's asking for you to redefine what is the back lot line. That is already established by ordinance, and that is not something for which you have the authority to redecide. That's a council decision on making a determination on defining what the ordinance says. So that, I have some concerns about what we're discussing here tonight, sir.
I do too.
That's why I asked that question.
I do too. And I do have one question though, and this is, and because we can't do, and first of all, there's a couple things we cannot do here. We can't move, and it's the reason I was asking about the easements is we can't move those. All right, they are
Other people have rights.
other people's rights. They're not here to argue. And if we don't know where those are, I mean, and from what I understand is there's no application to reduce the size of the setback. And even
Setback or the easement?
the setback, we can't do
can't-
anything.
We can't do
Right.
anything with the easement, I agree with that, okay.
A, we don't know where it is, one thing, and B, it's a property right. That's like taking a piece of somebody's
No,
property,
I agree with
a
you. I
chunk
just
out
wanted
of
to
the
make sure I
neighbors, or
understood
something like
correctly.
that. You can't do that. But my point, one of the reasons I was asking about it so vehemently is that even if this 15-foot easement is along this back line, this lot's probably not particularly buildable either, correct?
If the 15-foot easement, I plan to, or I would assume will be respected, and I think is proper along L2.
Well,
The
no, that's not my
25-foot
question.
the
That's not my
25-foot
question.
setback line, I think is proper along.
That's not my
L2.
question. My
Okay.
question is the 15-foot easement on the most recent survey along the one that's.
The long
I think that
the long
surveyor
one-
is incorrect. I think that surveyor is incorrect, that
Well,
that easement doesn't exist.
We don't know whether he's incorrect or not. That's between you and the surveyor. I'll agree, one of these surveyors is wrong.
Correct.
Yeah, there's no question about that. So, if,
But once again, the easement
But-
is
but
in question here. This-
the question here is, if this back lot line here, if this was instead of a 25-foot setback, a 15-foot setback, and ran right along with that easement along the back lot line, you still wouldn't have a buildable lot in your.
I don't think so, but once again, the easement, I do not believe that easement
Well,
exists.
okay, then let me ask you this.
I think a
Do you
private
have a
easement
copy?
exists.
Do you have a copy that you can show us of what's recorded at volume 4171, page 1272?
I have it on my computer, which is right here. And I can
Let's
show
see,
you that.
that's the doc, that is,
I believe you're gonna find it as frustratingly ambiguous
mhm,
as the documents come.
it's a bigger lot. That's the one that just went by here.
If you have a printer available, I can print it off.
Well, and the reason we didn't put it in the package is because by the time
Here,
you shrink it
see,
down.
this one
It's
comes
very,
down here like this, it's a little bit squarer.
We might have the big one. Let me see.
Is that a plat?
It is a plat, we
Okay.
may have an old paper print of it that's full size.
What,
So,
and it may be irrelevant, Roy,
Pretty much is.
but it's,
Well, it's.
But if we,
It's relevant to my question.
it's very relevant to your
My
question.
question
Yeah.
is that if things were worded differently, would we have the authority to grant a setback variance? If it was a request to, assuming per definition of the city ordinance, that back long line is the rear property line opposite, most nearly opposite to the front line, and would normally have a 25-foot setback. If it was worded such that asking for a variance to the setback to 15 feet in order to accommodate the easement that's on there, is that something we could decide on? Like that?
We could consider that, but it would take an amendment to his application.
Yeah,
That's correct.
which is an option on this, is it not, to amend the application with or without a fee? Wasn't that one of
Yes,
the options
it's one
on
of the
the thing?
options.
I'm sorry,
Here.
what amendment were you suggesting?
We
What-
need to, one of the things
what-
that we would want to make sure is that depending on what was submitted as far as the notice that had to go for this public hearing.
To neighbors?
Right, if it was noticed in a way that would allow for an amendment to the application without renoticing it, that's a possible step. Absolutely, you have the authority. It is directly your authority as a board to make decisions regarding variances from the setback requirements. Easements, as your chairman laid out very clearly, that's
Yes.
not part of your purview.
An easement
but-
is not our thing,
Yes.
or the city's thing for that matter necessarily.
Well, sometimes easements can be the city thing, but.
That's
it's
why I
not
said
something for
necessary.
this
I qualified it.
particular- Yeah.
I don't have it, I don't have that, Director. May I ask
Lord
a
almighty.
question or regarding something you said a minute ago?
Please direct your comments to the chairman and he can direct me whether he would like me to respond.
Go ahead.
A minute ago, this is gonna seem convoluted. You made the comment, I'm assuming you're the city attorney?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm sorry. City attorney made the comment that she did not believe that you had the right to determine what is the back lot line that the ordinance sets out. But I believe that the ordinance, if she rereads the ordinance, she'll see that that ordinance specifies that it can be several different lines. And I believe that that is open to interpretation, that the city, that the planning and zoning commission can determine which line that is. on several different lines.
Planning and zoning.
We're not planning and zoning, but
Planning
keep
and
that in
zoning.
mind.
Then this group right here,
Board of Adjustment.
Hang on a second.
if you have the ability to make the determination which is considered the back lot line.
Well, it's not the back lot line, sir. What's required is a rear yard setback, which is composed of the area that can be bound on more than one line.
It could be both, is what Mr. Jim Morris stated. Both of those lines could be, in theory, considered the back. So you would have both.
It wouldn't be set up as being choosing one versus the other.
Right.
It's like it could be multiple
It's
lines.
an L-shaped,
L-shaped backyard.
It could be
Yeah.
7 lines.
Yeah.
But could it
depending
not
on
be,
the,
could
It's
it
a
not
yard,
be one
not a
or
line.
the other?
I'm sorry?
Could it not be one or the other?
No, sir.
No, sir.
It's
Not in this
specifically defined as being all of them most directly opposite the front. And made up of as many lines as it happens to consist of.
Roy?
But this is new.
That's-
Because
that
there's
would make
many
almost every lot of them.
out there that,
But
Well,
once again, the setback is not based on the fact.
Correct. But what, and I was asking about the easement for a very practical reason, and that is, even if the setback wasn't there, the 15-foot easement is still there. And if that makes it unbuildable, then, the whole thing's moot.
I have my doubts whether this is buildable no matter what.
And in looking at this, while we can't find the exact
Last page.
street, it does look like the 15-foot easement runs parallel and adjacent to, abutting the 100-foot wide LCRA easement. So the 15-foot does appear to run along this back line. So, and that's not something we could do anything about, no matter what your application says. Okay?
The only thing we could do is grant a variance for changing, by definition, that's the backyard line, changing it from 25 foot, which is the standard, to a 15 foot.
I don't even think we can do that, because the backyard is set by ordinance. We
And
can't,
that's kind of our point.
we can't disregard the ordinance. All we can do is, we could grant a reduction of the 25-foot
That's what I said.
line.
That's what I said. It was a setback variance.
And
is
that-
what
that is
we're
a
saying the
point
same thing.
We made to the potential buyers as well as everybody else, that the relief is probably, the source is not this variance. The source is acquiring some property.
Which brings up my other question, because, and which, Roy, I hope you know the answer, maybe, or Aaron. Across the LCRA I'm looking at this right here. Across from the LCRA 100-foot, this juts out, which leads me to think that it's possible that, those strips of Lago Vista land that were, people could buy at one point, this looks like this is a series of strips that was
That is
those.
specifically
So,
the solution we mentioned in staff.
so my question is that does the city have property listed for sale that would be this?
I can't tell you that it's been declared surplus. We recommended that both the potential buyer and the owners contact the city council and look at it for there.
What are you talking about?
You're absolutely right. As a matter of fact, it's mentioned in the staff report.
Is it?
Well,
Don't
he
remember.
mentioned, but he
Well, it was
not willing
mentioned
to pay
that they didn't
fair
want to buy
market
that
value. He
strip.
did not want to pay fair market value for the property.
It seems to
Yeah, I don't
me.
know.
That was not, are you talking about me or about the previous?
Somebody has an email that
Candles.
suggested that the fair market value was quite low.
I made an offer on it.
Okay. Well, there was a bunch of alternative remedies, and that was one of them.
Well, I suggested an amount, but
That did not
That's
have
as far-
written fair market value.
Right, and that's.
no one came up with a different amount.
There was no
Oh.
counter offer?
Okay, now, we informed the officer and asked.
Mr. Chairman, we've gotten a bit off script.
Yes, yeah, let's get back to the thing, to our agenda item, which is whether or not, and all you're asking is that we designate the backyard setback line to be L2 rather than the line that runs parallel to the city property, correct?
Correct. That's all that I'm asking.
But the question is if the hardship is the lack of a buildable lot, does that solve it?
Well, but didn't Aaron just say we don't have the authority to designate the,
That was the nature of the question that we asked by email. Are you sure you don't want to ask for a reduction in the setback from 25 feet to 5? But remember, one of the criteria or purposes of a rear yard setback, in fact, I would argue the primary, is privacy from the adjacent property owner. And that's a point I made in the staff report. This is the size of a big storage room, not a backyard.
And here's the issue is, in looking at this document, whatever it is, the Barclay one, which I don't know if that is the
I think
actual,
It's the actual recorded, I think.
okay, if this is the actual
Or scanned
recorded
version, right, the scanned versions has the recording on it.
4171 plus page 1272. If that's the case,
Go to the last page.
it does not, it still is not very complete, but it also would seem to indicate that the 15-foot easement runs along
The
the
entire-
long the long line. And that's not something we could do anything about. If you would like to, well, we will have to take a vote on this, but I would suggest that there may be unless you want to effectively tell us now you want to amend your request. But we can't act on it tonight. We'd have to renotice it and do everything else. So
Well, depending on as Aaron said, depending on the notifications, how the notifications were when.
That's why I asked the question before I advertised in the email. Tell me exactly what you're asking for.
Yeah.
Yes, but it's listed down here, one of our options, potential alternative decisions, item number C. It says, deny the application for a variance seeking to adjust the location of the rear setback, but allow the applicant to amend this request without a new fee to seek and justify a specific reduction in the required rear
If he changes his
setback
mind.
that's what I'm trying to offer right now.
from the 25 feet required by the ordinance. If I could just finish my.
She's,
Yeah.
So
That's what I'm trying to offer him right now.
basically, there's potential option for me to ask for a 15-foot setback instead of 25-foot.
That appears to be the case. I would suggest that if you want more than that, then there's some more. I'd hate to send you back to either one of these title guys or plat guys till you figure out which one's right. But it would appear in looking at this document that 15-foot easement runs along the back of the 100-foot wide, right next to the 100-foot wide easement. So it runs along that long line. And that's again, we couldn't go any less than the easement, but if you went out and found that there actually was no easement there, then you could ask for more, but you'd have to prove it to us. The burden's on you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
what does our placement of the setback have to do with the easement? Why couldn't we give him a 5-foot setback? The easement's his problem.
Well, that is true.
And then,
He could
You can
vacate.
request, you
And
can
they would
request whatever.
Yeah.
And that would typically be successful.
Okay,
And
because they don't use them anymore. That's true. Good point.
One more point.
I would like to request an amendment of my variance to request a 5-foot setback.
Well, if we do that, then we're gonna have to renotice it from what I understand and come
Your
back.
decision will be whether you want.
It has to be renoticed, yeah.
Yeah, in which case, we would need somebody up here to make a motion consistent with potential alternative decision C.
Since I've already read it once, can I make a motion to deny the application for a variance seeking to adjust the location of the rear setback, but allow the applicant to amend this request without a new fee to seek and justify a specific reduction in the required rear setback from the 25 feet required by the ordinance?
Do you
Do I-
mind if I add the subtle hint is that in that language, do a drawing that proves that this then becomes buildable?
Do I have a second? Second
With
from,
that amendment?
second by Ms. Smith?
Yep.
All right, all in favor to allow?
Aye.
Allow that?
Aye.
Aye, it's unanimous?
That's what I mean by justify, to prove it.
Yep, yeah, the burden's on you if you want, so I would suggest, as Roy has said, get some sort of a depiction of a house that would meet the other zoning requirements and see if it'll fit. And,
Table A of chapter 14.
yeah, and you know,
Write that down, I know it's not perfect.
I'll send it to you by email. It basically gives you the minimum living area and the size of the garage, and you just draw a footprint, right? I can make this fit in those
Could he go
setbacks.
to, like, DEC?
To scale.
Who do I go to request
Turn around
a
and ask them what is their easement?
removal of the
They
easement?
got the same,
Well, you can do
Same
that, Mike.
picture.
It's a
they
separate
got the same
application.
one,
we
so
do.
it's just
It's very cheap.
their assertion
I'm the
versus.
cheapest lawyer.
Or you'd
around.
say 15 feet.
I have a law degree. I write those.
And if they
invoices
say
for
15
$125,
feet, then
which
the
is
best
the
we can do.
gross. I promise you, there's nobody else will do it for that, but it's become burdensome, but I do it.
Is a two-story acceptable?
Not unless you get the special exception first.
For height?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
just One comment, if you'll indulge me. Just a reminder to the applicant that you want to address the factors in your request for the variance, the factors that the board will consider. So look at those factors, those things that we discussed before your application was considered. So because it's your burden to show that you meet the requirements of a hardship as that is defined in our ordinance. You can look to the requirements of state statute as well.
Okay, so I have to reapply now for this variance?
We need a new
Yes, sir.
application, but it'll be fee waived.
We will waive the fee, but you have to submit documentation to show why your request for a 5-foot setback in lieu of a 25-foot setback is justified as a hardship.
And we'll solve the problem.
Right.
All right,
And you have to prove that it's only a 5-foot utility easement.
These right here.
Well, you can approve
No.
it subject to that being.
Sir, this is yours.
That's almost routine.
Yeah, that's it.
And many times, I'll give you an example. You know, what you'll get for a release letter from the other utility providers may occasionally say, we're not sure we have an easement here or not, but regardless, we don't need it.
it's almost like a quitclaim deed.
It is exactly like a quitclaim deed, yes, sir.
And
You understand all this stuff, so that helps. That helps a lot. Okay,
Thank you very much for your time, I do appreciate it. I'm sorry
Thank
if
you.
I was frustrating sometimes.
no,
I'm
sir,
sure you
you're,
can understand my situation.
yeah, you got real money in this game, that's quite all right, we understand. Do I have any other, I think that concludes our business.
Yep.
Do we have, yep, no minutes to approve, nothing else? Do I have a motion for adjournment?
A motion to make an adjournment.
Okay, and second from Ms. Sandra Pin, and all in favor?
Aye.
The fact, that's always the fact of the hands. All right, thank you very much, sir.
Do I turn these off?
No,
Okay.
He asked, it was the only application, it was good, and there was a screw up.
Good night, everyone. I must
on
rush.
it because of Labor Day and stuff, so. I think they, yeah,
I never saw, this is not original, this is not.
That
okay.
makes sense. I knew there had to be
Good catch.
something, but.
We didn't even get into that,
But it's interpreted.
that easement reduces the buildable area by 25% to the state.
I never saw that on the original. I'm not sure. I think you got it
It clearly did.
Maybe he will
pretty
remember that
sloppy.
when he said that was justification,
No,
because you laid it out there for him.
just how,
Hardly ever seen anything other than sloppy title survey. There's never been a title survey that I could
I know.
pick apart.
Well, and that was.
Reduce the number of applications.
Well, in our world,
The idea that
No,
they relied
okay.
on it, I kind of flabbergasted.
You might run into the problem where you use up more, 25% of the value of the lot in legal fees within about 15 minutes.
Well, I got news for you. One of these guys, we go over his work multiple times. It's so awful, and he doesn't do the actual work.
Well, a lot of these survey companies, they go out and they do 5, 6 title surveys a day.
Right.
How good of a job can they do if they're doing 5 a day? But that's the nature of their business now.
They clearly didn't go and look at that document, and know what they'll do is they'll rely on on previous title opinions and some
Previous surveys,
Yeah.
they'll look at previous
They do it
survey.
all the time. They do it all the time.
I have seen surveys that clearly were just copied right off of prior surveys without actually visiting the site.
Oh, yeah.
So,
I'm,
Notice can be, if we get a revised application from him, notice 15 days, right?
Yeah, but
But
we
we still have that.
Hill Country.
25%, yeah, that was
We can
news
do
to
a
me.
notice special, but this is the only one.
that's going to affect week and a half of this.
I'm like,
Yeah, I mean,
That's
unless
pretty
he's
much
on
is their-
on like verge of
That's,
trying to
that's
sell
part
it.
of the problem
There's-
for me,
They're pretty much
is,
trying to find another
by the way,
there isn't a
move
list.
this is
it
all
along.
important to
In
me.
the next 2
I'm
weeks,
retired,
yes.
and this is
I'm
my
with you.
401k money.
I know.
So this is,
Yeah. We're on
I get it.
unfortunately.
it's like, okay, here's money I thought I had, and all of a sudden it's disappearing.
But it's that time of year. It's always like this. This month is always like that.
Yeah, well, and we had to prepare for this year because we not only had charters, we not only had
When I
budget, we
hit
also
the
had
exit
charter.
button,
Yeah,
the
which only happened
message
every
now
3 years,
says,
so it's like a double
if
edged
a
sword.
stream recording is currently active, are you sure you want to log out /exit? I swear, but
Can I show?
And I just asked, like, yeah, I don't know what kind of whammies are floating around.
yeah, okay,
Good evening.
And you too.
yeah.